This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, quarantine, narcotics case jurisdiction, and SAR. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode 77 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality, crime-related fiction. This week, I'm talking about isolation in quarantine by public health, narcotic case jurisdiction, and using SAR to search for missing children. And real quick, I need to thank Gold Shield patrons Deborah Dunbar from DeborahDunbar.com, CC Jameson from CCJameson.com, Larry Keaton, Vicky Tharp of VickyTharp.com, Chris Ann, Larry Darter, Natalie Borelli of NatalieBorelli.com, and Craig Kingsman of CraigKingsman.com for their support with this episode. I also want to send a huge thanks to my Coffee Club patrons, and you can find links to all of the writers supporting this episode in the show notes at writersdetective.com/77. And to learn about setting up your own Patreon account for your author business, or to support the show for as little as $2 per month, visit writersdetective.com/Patreon. Patreon. I was intrigued by the news story this week about the quarantine of Americans returning from China, where there's obviously, as you know, been an outbreak of the coronavirus, which led me down a bit of a research rabbit hole about the powers of public health authorities when it comes to quarantine or isolation. Federal law Title 42 U.S. Code Section 264 empowers the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Surgeon General the power to isolate and quarantine. And that power has been delegated to the CDC, our Center for Disease Control, to handle the actual boots on the ground implementation of isolation or quarantine. Now that's at the federal level, and the states have one as well. So in California, we have a health and safety code that provides authority to the state's Department of Health Services to conduct isolations and quarantines. So according to the CDC website, if a quarantinable disease is suspected or identified, CDC may issue a federal isolation or quarantine order. So public health authorities at the federal, state, and local, and even tribal levels may sometimes seek help from police or other law enforcement officers to enforce a public health order. So according to the CDC, breaking a federal quarantine order is punishable by fines and imprisonment, and it's also a misdemeanor crime in most states for state-level violations. So what's the difference between isolation and quarantine? Isolation separates sick people with a contagious disease from people who are not sick. So if you think back in history to the leper colonies, that would be isolation, where quarantine separates and restricts the movement of people who were exposed to a contagious disease to see if they become sick. So the interesting thing, and the reason why I'm talking about this, or at least interesting to me, is that the quarantine and isolation orders are issued by a health officer, not usually a judge, like in a criminal matter. But it's still a matter of government restricting the movements and freedom of its citizens. So it could be an interesting area in the law to write about. So if we were to look at detentions of citizens on a spectrum, with one end of the spectrum being public health and the other end of the spectrum criminal apprehension, the closer we get to the criminal side of things, the more we start to deal with due process, like probable cause and needing warrants and authority from courts to do so. But on that public health end, the government can actually restrict your freedom of movement without any kind of legal due process. And I guess the kind of middle ground of that public health on one end to criminal detention on the other spectrum would be mental health holds, which would kind of be right in the middle. But anyway, check out cdc.gov for more on public health orders for quarantine and isolation, especially if you're considering writing a story about bioterrorism or how to deal with the legalities of dealing with a disease epidemic and preventing it from becoming a pandemic. So this week's first question comes from Marnie Werner. Marnie writes, I have a jurisdiction question. I have a cabin in the woods where a drug gang is receiving bulk shipments of drugs and repackaging for sale. I haven't decided if it's located on county land, state forest, or national forest land, but it's not on private property. Who has jurisdiction? In other words, who would go in and make the bust if it's located on state or national forest land, and what evidence would be needed for a warrant to do so? And now that I think about it, is a warrant needed to go on the property if it's on public land? And is a separate warrant needed to be able to arrest people? Does it make a difference if the cabin is owned by a private party or abandoned and not owned by anyone? These are great questions, Marnie. We've talked about geographic boundaries as jurisdiction boundaries quite a bit on this podcast, and usually those examples are of a homicide investigation, and the jurisdiction is determined by either where the body was found or where the person was killed prior to being dumped somewhere else. Narcotics investigations are different animals altogether. These are proactive investigations where the crime is ongoing. We're not talking about a specific incident that happened in the past. And while your cabin is a transshipment point in a specific location, the more basic jurisdiction question is which agency is running an investigation that revealed the location of this cabin. When you're running a narc case, you go wherever it takes you, whether it's a surveillance into the woods, information from an informant, the billing info from a cell phone. It all ties back to your original narcotics case. When I worked narc cases, I had a bag in my truck that had several changes of clothes and a DOP kit, because when we were working big cases that involved a lot of surveillance, especially wiretap cases, there was no telling where we would be headed. I've ended up in Las Vegas, San Diego, the high desert, in the middle of nowhere, you name it. So if you're a local cop and you're working a narcotics case, the way you got started was obviously some sort of nexus to your jurisdiction. And as you start working your way up the food chain, that's going to take you away from your home city or county. But it's still your jurisdiction. As a local law enforcement officer, my state authority to arrest works anywhere in the state. So if I'm leaving Los Angeles County, working my investigation, and it's taking us down near the border where the drugs are coming across from Mexico, I can still make an arrest and serve search warrants down in San Diego County. And we'll talk about in a little bit about notifications, but it's still my investigation because it's my informants, my surveillance, all of those things that led to this location. And the local authorities in San Diego may have no idea what this investigation is all about until we bring them into the fold. So when it comes time to make the bust, you most likely would notify the local agency. About the only reason why you wouldn't is if your investigation reveals that there's some sort of compromise within that agency. But 99% of the times, you're going to notify the local agency. And since narcs are usually pretty scruffy looking and we operate in unmarked vehicles, we would more often than not ask for some uniformed officers to come with us on the search warrant if we were like way out of our normal jurisdiction. So that way, when we're banging on the door and somebody looks out their peephole or their window, they see a local police car and a local police officer in uniform. But if this was relatively local to our normal jurisdiction, we may just call that local agency's dispatch to give them a heads up that we were about to serve a search warrant, but not necessarily request any assistance. You know, just in case the dispatch center starts getting 911 calls about a gang of ugly dudes with guns going into an apartment complex. Because normally people focus on the gun. They don't notice that it says police on the back of your shirt. As for needing a warrant, yes, even on public land, the cops are going to need a search warrant for the cabin because the dopers have an expectation of privacy. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but the reason they're out there hiding is because they're not trying to do this out in the open. And there's even case law that a search warrant is needed if searching like a tent of a homeless person on public land. So barring any exceptions to the search warrant requirement, in this case, the police would definitely need to get a search warrant for the cabin, even if it was something that was out in the middle of the forest, which is really not a big deal. They're just going to lay out their story, just like I've talked about in other episodes. They're going to lay out their probable cause and explain why they think that illegal drug possession, packaging for sale, all of that is occurring at this location. As for arrest warrants, the police would need to know the identities of those in the cabin and then already have proof for probable cause in order to obtain an arrest warrant. But at this point, they probably have neither. They just have this location of where this transshipment packaging stuff is going on. So what would most likely happen is the police would serve the search warrant on that cabin, And then assuming they find drugs and evidence of those drugs being packaged for sale, the occupants would be arrested for the on-view criminal violation. So meaning the officers have probable cause to arrest them for the felony that is occurring right in front of them, and they don't need an arrest warrant because essentially they've been caught in the act. So what happens if the police serve the search warrant at the cabin, detain everyone inside, search the place, and they find nothing? Then the occupants are free to leave once the search is complete and the police leave. And then also, when the search is complete, regardless of whether anyone is arrested or if anyone was even there, the police will leave a copy of the search warrant and an itemized list of everything seized. And they will leave that somewhere obvious for the owner of that location to find, like on a kitchen table or just inside the front door if we're talking about a normal house. So, Marnie, the short answer is it's going to be the agency that's working that case, regardless of where the cabin is located. And then, yes, they will get a search warrant, which will be relatively quick and easy for the detectives to do. This week's next question comes from Eugenia Parrish, whose novels you can find on Amazon. So Eugenia writes, "A child goes missing. I know California cops must go into action quickly. I have them knocking on doors and searching out buildings. But there's a lot of dry, rolling hills behind the outlying neighborhoods of the small town in the desert. Lots of arroyos, gullies, etc. My question is, would citizens be requested or even allowed to join in the searches out there? Or would they be asked to leave it to the organized searches of the police? Oh, and second question, would helicopters be used or anything else? How about a mobile headquarters? I guess that's a lot of questions, so thank you in advance." Well, you're very welcome, Eugenia. The first request for help with searching beyond the patrol officers would go to the county search and rescue unit, which is usually run by the sheriff's department. Most SAR teams, as we call them, SAR in all capitals, most SAR teams in California are volunteer. There are a few that are full-time, but the majority are volunteers. But they have specialized training for these kind of missions. They'll be trained in using rope systems and orienteering and all sorts of other stuff, GPS and topography stuff. So the SAR teams would be the first ones to get the call, along with the helicopters, definitely. So helicopters, if they're available, would be called in some of the more remote counties of California, especially in the very northern part of the state. The only helicopter that might be available may belong to CHP, the California Highway Patrol. But if we're talking about the deserts in California and Southern California, there will be helicopters available from the Highway Patrol as well as the either local police departments or the sheriff's department for most of those Southern California counties. Canine teams capable of tracking scent would likely be called as well. For the canines, the initial track would most likely be done by a patrol canine. So the police dog that you see in the black and white driving around town, some of those will be trained potentially for tracking. So that would likely be a shepherd of some type, like a German shepherd or maybe even a Belgian Malinois. But the absolute best breed for tracking are bloodhounds. So the agency may have a contact that can provide a bloodhound for tracking. Most agencies that I know of don't actually have bloodhounds on staff within their departments for immediate deployment, but you can usually get a bloodhound team within about a day. And I've seen bloodhounds do some unbelievable tracks. That's a whole topic for a whole other podcast episode. So I will come back to bloodhounds one of these days. Let's see what else. If the sheriff's department in that rural desert area has a mounted unit where deputies are on horseback, they'd be requested as well for those backcountry searches. And they may also have ATVs or those Polaris Razors, the all-terrain vehicles that you can sit side by side. Those may be used by either the sheriff's deputies or the search and rescue members. In this scenario where there's a very large search area, the county's SAR team may request mutual aid from other SAR teams throughout the region or even the state. So you may end up with a very large SAR response within a day, or maybe two. And another resource you might see, especially as the search becomes prolonged over several days and it becomes increasingly likely that you're searching, unfortunately, for a body, The SAR teams may deploy with cadaver dogs. These are search and rescue dogs specifically trained to sniff for dead bodies, especially ones that are buried. I've seen Labradors and Australian Shepherds trained as cadaver dogs, and I may have even seen a beagle at one point, if I remember correctly. Let's see what else. Back to the citizens. If it is not uncommon for citizens to form their own search parties and organize amongst themselves, especially if a family member makes a public plea for help. So yes, you may see citizens out searching, but whether that request comes from the police or the sheriff's department will really be up to you as the author of the story. The police certainly can't prevent the public from going out and searching on their own, but members of the public don't usually create these search teams immediately. It's usually after a few days when the child hasn't turned up yet. Now, there are pros and cons to using the public to search. The obvious con is the potential for the inadvertent destruction of evidence if they do find something and trample over important things like a suspect's footprints or tire tracks or drag marks in the dirt. But the pros, obviously, are that you can cover a lot more territory and increase the likelihood of finding the child sooner, which improves the odds that the child may still be found alive. And then, yes, the bigger the search effort gets and the longer the search goes on, the more likely you're going to have some sort of command post vehicle out there, kind of as a base for coordinating all the different teams that are out there by radio and tracking their GPS movements, and then kind of making sure they're keeping track of the areas that have been checked and the areas that still need to be checked. So yeah, eventually you would have some sort of command post vehicle out there as well. So thank you so much for listening this week. And hey, last week I talked about how having a mailing list of readers that want to buy your books being the single most important asset you can develop as an author. And when I say mailing list, I'm talking about your readers' email addresses. The very best system to use for your mailing list, for your newsletter, is ConvertKit. And I've been a user of ConvertKit for years. But the barrier to entry was always that it cost money to use. But ConvertKit has now announced a free plan. So you can hear more details in last week's episode. But if you use the link writersdetectivebureau.com/CK free, you can get a free landing page, free mailing list services until you hit 100 subscribers, and then unlocking the sending functionality instantly by joining through my link. Now, I do have to say that this is an affiliate link, so even though it is completely free for you to use as far as an account, if you do get to the point when you're hugely successful and you start paying for more subscribers to be on your list, then they will pay me a commission. But until then, go get your 100 subscribers, go build your landing page, and start connecting with your readers by joining ConvertKit on the free plan. The link is writersdetectivebureau.com/CK free. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week and write well.